This episode of the Zelos podcast is sponsored by Perform Better. Perform Better is the leader in functional training by supplying innovative products and top-notch education to trainers, coaches, and therapists. Check out the brand new Perform Better app, designed for professionals who want to stay on top of their game. This free app features education from the world's best. You'll learn from industry leaders including Mike Boyle, Gray Cook, Sue Falzoni, Charlie Weingroff, and many more. Topics range from strength and conditioning, program design, nutrition, business, and marketing. Just go to performbetter.com. Welcome back to another episode of the Zelos podcast. I'm Rocky Snyder, and in the house with me is head strength conditioning coach of the New Orleans Saints, Dan Dalrymple. And Dan, you've been, is it 2006? You've been, that's phenomenal. You're going on your 15-year anniversary with the Saints.
Already into my 16th year. My anniversary was February 6th after the Super Bowl. I came down that Monday, and first day of work was on Tuesday in 2006. This is my 33rd year full-time, 32nd year as a head strength and conditioning coach, because I was 17 years coaching, 16 years as a head strength and conditioning coach at Miami of Ohio, my alma mater. Then I came to the Saints, and now I'm going to my 16th season here. So I'm like a unicorn. I'm one of those rare beings that the coaches that have maintained, all this time and been able to stay in a couple different places. So.
Well, your office isn't like in some dark basement in the corner where they don't even know you exist, right? You're kind of front and center with everything. I gotta say, University of Miami, Ohio, when you were there, not that they're not a really great basketball team, but when you were there, they were in the Final Four, at least heading that way a couple times, weren't they?
We made the farthest we went was Sweet 16 when Wally Zerbiak was a senior. But we had a good program. We had I had Ben Roethlisberger there as our quarterback, and during my time there, and had a lot of other good players. Have really good hockey program as well. So my sports there, actually, as the head guy, I started out. I was the first full-time strength coach there ever, hired in December of 1989, and I had all sports, and then I was able to hire one assistant, and then eventually my last year there, I had 2 GAs as well. So that was my whole staff for the entire department. And I did football by myself, men's and women's basketball, volleyball, and ice hockey all by myself. And then every once in a while I do some soccer and some some of the other sports, whatever. My assistant kind of handled all the rest of the Olympic sports. And so Wow. It was interesting when I got here, and I had just football players, and I had 2 full-time assistants. Or actually, at that time, I had an intern and a full-time, and now I have 2 full-times. But it's different. So
yeah, I imagine that was actually going to be one of my biggest questions. Really, how different is it? I'm sure it's very different in the way that you don't have all those different sports, but the different positions and the level of competition is completely different. So what are the biggest differences between?
I would say, well, one, outside coming in, there's a lot more media interest in the New Orleans Saints and that we're dealing with, and so you're on, more people are interested in what you're doing probably than what I was used to at being in the Mid-American Conference for so long with our sports. Or not that our sports weren't worthy of coverage, but they certainly were. But it's just different, and you're not on the same national scale. So that's a little bit different. It's interesting to be dealing with people who are world renowned. So, and you're seeing them every day. So that's a little different experience. The biggest issue, I would say, you're dealing with grown men, professionals who not only bring a lot more skill and experience to the position, but also bring a litany of compensation patterns and injuries and things that you don't see when you're dealing with a demographic that's 17, 18 years old to like 21 to, some of our hockey players might have been 22, 23 by the time they got done playing, but they were a little bit older, some of the Canadians or whatnot. But I'm dealing with, Drew Brees is 42, so, there's issues of that. At least I hope to be. I don't know. We're still waiting on his decision whether or not he's going to stay with it or retire or whatever. But, so you're dealing with this gamut of guys. And so your approach to training has to take that into effect. There's kind of I always tell young players that I've seen young players come into our league who don't work hard or don't have a plan of how they're going to do things. But I don't know of any old player, because you don't get to be an old player unless you have a good plan and of how you're handling your work and your business and taking care of your body and working towards it and your nutrition and all those different things. They just, the young players that don't know how to do it or refuse to do it are out, so they never get to be, in year 5, 6, 7, or 8, whatever. But with that, then you're also dealing with some guys who have some very strong opinions on what their training should look like. And so you go from being in college where you're almost more of a dictator. We're doing it this way because I said we're doing it this way. And if you don't like it, that's too bad. We'll go out and run some wind sprints. But here you need to be more of a partner with your especially your good guys, which we have a tremendous amount of good guys, a bunch of guys who are really hard workers and high character players. That's one of the things that just 1 minute. I've got the head coach here.
Jim Chain.
Hey, Jim.
Good to see you. Good to see you, Dave. What's working on?
I've got a podcast thing going on.
Keep going. You'll see him later on.
All right, I see him. And the head coach comes in and has the coach coming to visit. So you just that's the only person they'll pull me away.
No problem.
But anyways,
well, so you were talking about coordinating and communicating, being kind of more of a team approach with other maybe specialists or coaches that players bring in. Now, there's one I'm sure maybe mutual colleague or mutual friend that we have, and that's Tom House. And Tom's been the throwing coach for Drew for many, many years, like 16, 17 years. So give me an example of like when Tom comes and does some stuff with Drew, what is it that you and Tom communicate? What is it?
Well, it's interesting because probably I have more now. When Tom comes in, we'll just watch some of the things he's doing with Drew, so that when Drew wants to do that and he needs help, myself or our director of sports medicine will work with him. A lot of things that Tom does, our PTs and stuff will work with Drew on. Some of my direct contact are with a guy that Drew has trained under for probably as long as he's been with Tom House, Todd Durkin down in San Diego. And, Todd and I have had plenty of conversations over the years. And basically it's just, you hope it's a case of where we're two professionals who have the same goal for the player. And so we're willing to help each other and give each other information, say, hey, we did this. But a lot of times what ends up even not a direct communication between myself and the outside professional, it's a case of the athlete comes in and they say, hey, in my training, I've been doing this. Like John Billman and I used to sit down and he would come back. He was training with Coach Swayze over in Florida, was at University of Miami at the time. And I'm not quite sure, he's running a business down in South Florida and trains a lot of players. But Johnny would talk about what he was doing and what he was going to do. He had done pre-off season and where he'd hope to pick it up when he would leave here because our players get about a 5-day or 5-week break between the end of our OTAs and the beginning of our training camp. And that's pretty common across the NFL. So they have this 5-week training period on their own. And so you try to coordinate it with a player who is really dialed into his training. You try to look at it and say, okay, how can we make sure we're not, being redundant or we're not, it's a relatively seamless transition. And so, we would sit down and we'd talk about that. And then I would just bridge the gaps. And if I had questions about what they were going to expect to be doing, in July when they returned, I would do that. I I'd call the coach and say, hey, where are we at here? But most of the time it was pretty simple. And I know, okay, here's where we're at. Because some of the guys will return from camp or return to our off-season program, and they haven't maybe done any Olympic lifts for a while. And so I know that I can't just jump in on as if they're in week 5 of a training program using power cleans. And so that's a simple thing. But then there's other guys who've been through and they're like, hey, I've already gone through an accumulation phase and I'm in intensification, whatever. So it becomes a little tricky because you're dealing like in the off season with 60, 70 guys, then 90 some guys maximum, and they all come from different backgrounds.
Sure.
So that's the thing too, because in college, it was pretty simple. The season would end, and depending on what the NCAA rules were at the time, you'd have a period of time off, and then you start training them again, and basically you'd have them all summer long, you'd have them all winter long, you'd have them for 4 or 5 years straight. Here we have guys coming in and out of the program. They're coming from all different backgrounds. They're going away doing all kinds of different things, and so then you're trying to rebuild it. So it keeps you, and it's not like we write programs individually for each different player, but we take into account different levels of where they're at and what they can do, and then they have issues with what they can do medically. So we have
now that's interesting because you brought up compensatory patterns, and one question I have is, because you've been doing it now going into your 16th year, if you look back to maybe even your time at the university before getting on to New Orleans, would you say that the athletes are because of maybe technology advancing and whatnot, that you're seeing more compensatory patterns as the years go by, because gently or generally on the whole, our society, the kids are not playing like they used to when we were growing up? Are you seeing that?
I think that I remember years ago, and this is probably the early 1990s, I was at an NSCA conference, and unfortunately I can't remember her name, but there was a female orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine professional who talked. And at the time, and it's because I was dealing with female athletes, it was one of the talks that I went to, they were talking about the prevalence of injury in female athletes, of non-contact, ACLs and things like that in female athletes, and the preponderance of it over male athletes. And there's all kinds of crazy talk about hormonal and all these different things, and some things that we just, if you're a fan of women's athletics, which I am, you don't really buy into. But she had a very interesting point. She said that little boys growing up are encouraged to roughhouse, and they're encouraged to do training. And then when they get a little bit older and they maybe walk in the weight room for the first time, someone's teaching them how to do squats, and they're teaching them how to do Olympic lifts, and they're teaching them how to do heavy training. A female athlete, even though she may, play from a young age, she may not have the same roughhousing as a toddler that you have with a boy. And that's just societal norms, so to speak. And there's differences from it, of course. But then, at that time too, and it's different now, luckily, I think, but like a woman's workout, female athletes maybe been steered more towards machine oriented training, and there's just less. And she had this idea that, similar to speech patterns, if a human being doesn't learn how to speak by a certain age, they're never going to learn how to speak, right? If you don't learn kinesthetic awareness, and you don't learn proprioception and all these different things that you learn from playing and running and jumping and doing all that stuff, you're never really going to have that same level of skill. And she made a prediction that I think is very true, that we're going to see that even back out, because little boys were starting to do a lot less playing. Right. And then you also added into adding into getting specialized at an early age, or organized sports versus disorganized free play, and all those things affecting how the athlete develops, is going to affect that. And I think we see that. And I think that's why some of the injuries are different now than what you used to see all the time. You see some things that are that are much more prevalent happening now. And you're like, what? I remember like we'd see, you know, um, some different bone abnormalities and stuff with that you never saw, just like with these like stress fractures and
Uh-huh.
feet and ankles and some of these things, and like uh tendon tears, Achilles tendon tears at a younger age. It was old guys like me trying to go out and play tennis that would step back and tear an Achilles, or thinking we could go play pickup basketball and tear an Achilles. And now you're seeing like 20-year-old athletes tearing Achilles and things like that. And it's just, you think that society's kind of crept into athletics, and everybody wants to say everybody's bigger, faster, and stronger. And maybe they are to a degree, but I think you can see, you look back over time and there were some pretty big, fast, strong athletes in the past too.
Yes. And now the passive means of competition being on a Game Boy or whatever, or even on a phone, that's going to add up. So I am also kind of continuing that prediction on. Interestingly enough, and coincidental that you're in New Orleans, is that the NSCA annual conference back in, I think it was 94 or 95, was in New Orleans. And at that conference, there was a speaker, and his name was Jeff Gluckman, and he was with the Dynamics of Physical Development Consultants. And he was also talking about muscular balance and posture development, and saying that as we progress on in society and reduce our level of purposeful physical movement, that the degradation of our integrity or our structure is going to increase. And therefore, we're going to see more non-contact injuries in sports and whatnot. And at that time, not many people were talking about muscle balance and posture and how it fits into strength conditioning. But boy, that totally resonated with me. So there were some bubbles percolating up to the surface. And fortunately, we both were able to hear it. So, there's a lot of people that think that the position that you're in as head strength conditioning, you've basically made it. You're there, and people are just going to learn from you with all your experience and knowledge, and you don't need to learn anymore. But that's a bunch of crap, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, this was told to me by a good friend of mine in the league before I entered the league, and it was actually before I was even thinking about entering the league. NFL players are motivated to reach their personal goals as a player, right? And so they're looking for a coach who can provide them with information and techniques and abilities that can coach them to improve their performance so they can reach their goals. And as long as you have information that they view as being necessary and they view as being valuable, they'll continue to listen to you, and you'll have value as a coach. The minute that they feel like your information is no longer valuable, or they've gotten all the information they can use out of you, you're no longer valuable to them, and then you're out. And that's 100% true. I think that we have to stay on cutting edge, and I think it's a competition because it's very easy. We talked a little bit about before we started the podcast here, about how you can become isolated in this job, and you don't maybe necessarily get out to go to clinics and maybe talk with your colleagues as much as you might in some other areas of the profession. And so like it'd be very easy to know what you know. It'd be very easy to sit back and say, yeah, I've reached my pinnacle. And then all of a sudden you don't know the latest techniques. You don't know what's going on out in the world. The players going out there, because they're working with trainers and they've got all kinds of different ideas and they're bringing stuff to you. And if you don't know what it is when they bring it to you, you're going to lose credibility with them. So I think it's even more so important for me because of that, because like I mentioned, like in college, you're the dictator. Here you're more the facilitator. So I have to stay on top of stuff. And I just think that's important anyways. And you never, if you think you have all the answers,
you're falling behind. Yeah. So with COVID, and of course, before we started recording, we were talking about getting CEUs or continuing education units, because we still have to maintain our credentials and go out there. So how have you been doing it this past year, I'm curious, where do you go for your education, and what are the avenues or the concepts that you're hunting down currently?
Well, I'll go backwards. I'll answer your last question first. The biggest kind of area that we're looking at right now is velocity-based training, and ways that we can integrate that more into our program, and different technologies that we might be wanting to apply in our program. So we're testing out some of the different technologies now and seeing that, and then also seeing some of the different ways, trying to understand all the research data that's come on velocity-based training and all the different work, Brian Mann stuff, all the different things that are going on there, and then seeing how that can be applied to our program. And I see, besides just the idea of moving, objects faster, and using velocity as kind of the measurement metric, besides just how much weight's on the bar, how much weight we're lifting, or the technique or the exercise we're doing. I think there's some very good methods. That the challenge for me, in college, we did a lot of 1 rep maxes, and we take a week to do testing and stuff like that periodically. And so I had a really good, plan or idea of where the athlete was. We do our 40-yard dashes, and we do our vertical jumps and our long jumps and our power clean 1 rep maxes and our squat 1 rep maxes and benches, and then some rep maxes on body weight exercises, chin-ups, things like that. So we put together a whole physical performance profile. We don't have the time to do that. When you say that our off-season program is 9 weeks and 2 weeks of that is only strength and conditioning, the rest of it also involves football. So I have 9 total weeks of contact with them, and then the guys are gone. We finish the season, and the next day we have exit interviews. However you finish it, the next day it's exit interviews. They're gone. You may not see them again until April. So they may be leaving here in January, February, and then they're back in April. And then they leave in mid-June, and they're back in July. And not to mention that you got people coming in at all times. Every week we have a new player on the roster, and a new old player leaves, and it's churning the roster all the time. So to say, well, we got to go through our week of testing, you don't have it. Not to mention, it's like, okay, we're in the middle of the season. I need to know what a 1 rep max for a guy's squat is, so I can figure out what percentage he should be training at. Can't do it. But I can use the velocity-based training to do some stuff during the workout and try to factor in and find some accurate methods of determining a rep max for them that we can then extrapolate a single rep max for, and that can be used for our training, so we can keep track if we're getting positive results. We also use force plates, and we can measure some jumping metrics and things like that in there. And so the speed is important for us to use, so that we know that if we're not making the progress we want with the athlete, is it the training program design itself, or is it just the implementation of the training? Is the player actually moving the bar at the speed that we want to get the required results?
Gotcha.
So that velocity-based stuff is real high on our list.
So you use that as, excuse me, you use the velocity, like, are we talking maybe 40-meter sprint, 40-meter dash, and you're using that almost as kind of like a heart rate monitor, or an indication of load and volume of work based on their outcome there, or is this completely different?
Well, really what we're looking at is more stuff in the weight room.
In the weight room.
And the bar speed that we're working at a certain exercise. So like if we're trying to do, my background, a lot of the things that I do are similar to some of the things, the concepts that Louis Simmons has put forward with maximal effort days and dynamic days and things like that. I take a lot of information from a lot of people, but that's an idea. So if we're doing a dynamic day and we say we want to do speed squats, right? And so we'll say we want the bar to move at X meters per second. We need some way to measure that other than the coach's eye, because you look at a bar and say, okay, he's moving fast, but how fast? And so there's some specific data that has been determined of, maximum speeds to to look at various aspects of strength, where your speed, strength, speed, all these different speed, endurance, all the different factors that you could be training. And so we just need to find a way to measure that. And it used to be you'd use Tendos, and then there's Gym Aware, and now there's some video technology that you can use that can track the bar speed. And so those are the things we're looking at, so that we can determine, I can set them, for instance, I can do a workout, and we can just say, let's say we're doing sets of 5, and we only want to count the reps that are, at a certain speed, based on, we know that, like, as you approach 1 rep max, your speed goes to 0, right? Because once you exceed the 1 rep max, you can't move the bar, so there's no speed. And then it's kind of a law of diminishing returns. You get to a certain light weight, and the weight's almost too light to move fast. You need some resistance to create that speed. So we know those numbers, and we can put it in, and whatever we're training, whatever aspect we're training, we can determine what we think the 1 rep max is. And then when these athletes come back and go back and forth, we can say, well, 500 pounds was a player's back squat max when he left. And we know that he could, move, 85% was this number of that number. And he comes back, and now you find out the bar speed slowed down quite a bit. And that would tell you, well, that's telling me that 500 pounds is no longer his max. That 85% is actually maybe 95% of what his actual max is. So the bar speed slowed down.
Gotcha.
Right? Without doing the testing.
Sure.
Without saying, hey, okay, do another set of 1, do another set of 1. And you have that risk. And also when you're doing rep maxes, it's difficult because you get fatigue, right? So if we can cut it off and say, hey, anytime it slows down past this number, I don't care if you could do 5 more reps. You can't do fast enough. So,
now, you mentioned the force plate too. So I'm curious, on the ground-based movements like cleans, jerks, push presses, or anything, squats and so on, do you put the athletes on a force plate so you can correlate not only bar speed, but where their mass distribution is? And as they start fatiguing, where does their mass shift?
During the season, or during the off-season program, during the season this last year, we tried to do a series of jumps on the force plate once or twice a week when the player would come in. And then we would use that data. We'd look at asymmetries in their jumping and landing. We'd look at their a bunch of different metrics and try to determine readiness. An NFL football game is like in a car accident. So you come in after that and you're all beat up. And our job during the season is to get the player back ready to go, so that by the next Sunday or Monday or Thursday, whenever they're playing, they're ready to go again, right? So we might test that, and then that would determine, like, if we notice that they're going down every week in their numbers, becoming less explosive, that is kind of a harbinger for maybe some overtraining, or they're just not recovering enough. And so that would tell us that, hey, we need to up our recovery methodologies. We have recovery days built in, different active recovery strategies that we build into the athlete's weekly schedule. There's all kinds of different modalities they might use. I mean, we have chiropractors, we have yoga instructors, we have massage therapists, we have a cryo chamber, we have the egg sleep chambers in our facility. We've really spared no expense in technology to help guys recover, and then players individually have their own regimens they do. So if we notice that the guy is coming in and seems to be, his performance is decreasing, you don't see it on the field maybe, but you may see it because it's a long season. You want to catch it in October or late September, rather than, oh, it's the end of the year, and no wonder we didn't make the playoffs. We lost the last 4 games because we were just worn out.
Yeah, you want them peaking in January.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned sleep. I'm kind of curious. Are we talking like hyperbaric chambers? Are we talking actually sleep studies where they spend the night over there, or what's that all about?
We have a woman, Dr. Meeta Singh, who consults us for sleep, and she does a lot of provides a lot of information to our coaches and players of how they should be sleeping, and some of the things that they like. We set up our schedule, sometimes our travel schedule going out west. A lot of times now we'll stay overnight after a game. Like we have a West Coast Monday night game. Instead of, it used to be you just jump on the plane after the game and you fly back. Well, then that whole sleep schedule is disrupted. We feel like the players may not agree because a lot of times they just want to get home.
Sure.
But we may say, hey, it's better off to finish the game, go back to the hotel, get a good night's rest, fly back on the next morning and stay on our same rhythm. Or we may change our practice schedule if we know we're going to play a number of night games. So the guys are trying to change their rhythm a little bit so that they're awake. We used to always meet at like 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning. And we've moved back our first meeting to 9 o'clock in the morning to try to allow for players to sleep in a little bit longer, because we realize that if we let them sleep in more in the morning, their nighttime ritual is going to be about the same. So we need to move our day back a little bit.
Are other teams
early
doing that?
risers can still come in and train. What's that?
Are other teams doing that?
I think to some degrees, yeah. Because this is a big. There's 32 of us all trying to get an advantage, right? So I'm not going to think. I'd love to sit here and think, man, we're the smartest people in the world. We've had a great deal of success over the last 4 or 5 years with a number of wins in regular season. I think we're leading the NFL in that. It does nothing for us because we didn't win the Super Bowl. So it's like whatever, the nice consolation prize, but who cares? So. We need to get the final prize, but we're not probably doing anything. You just hope that your players are complying. And back to the hyperbaric. Some guys have hyperbaric chambers at home.
Okay.
We don't have any on in our facility, but we do have the float tank pods where a guy can go get like a nap.
Nice.
In the salt water and use that for recovery. We do recovery days on Mondays, and we do them on Fridays. So after practice on Friday, we have a bunch of different stations, and the players are kind of required to attend like they may go through a yoga session to do kind of a stretching, mobility, body awareness kind of relaxation. She also does a lot of things with breathing just to get, some recovery there because we feel like we've put in some work during the week, and now we really want to get the batteries recharged by that Sunday game. And then we do the same thing on Monday. We have, dry needling practitioners in our training room that can do some of those techniques. You have Graston technique. You have all this different work, body work that we can do on our players to help them, feel better, more so than anything than we've done before. We have our team nutritionist, Jamie Meeks, is outstanding, and she has nutritional, like every player has a specialized smoothie that they can have after their any activity, and she'll do some things in terms of counseling of what they should be, supplementation they should be possibly using for their their work. There's some limitations that the NFL has and what type of supplements that we're allowed to provide. So we have to follow those protocols. But she's a great resource when a guy has some questions about, where his diet might be deficient. She can do that. And
that's cool. Now you
prescribe melatonin for people and things like that,
I'm completely jealous is not the word. I mean, I'm agog at how many things you have under one roof. That's just phenomenal. I just drool at the thought of just experiencing that. Now, we were talking about continuing education units also, and not that I'm asking for you to endorse any overall or whatever, but with COVID, you went online and you were pursuing knowledge in different fields for CEUs. Where are some of the places that you found information?
Well, this is one of the things we did. We were planning before COVID to host a USA weightlifting level 1 coaches club clinic here in our facility, and that got shut down. And so we ended up, because we'd already signed up for them, we ended up doing an online one, and it was outstanding. I wasn't able to, it wasn't the hands-on actually doing the Olympic lifts a lot, but for a coach, it was tremendous because we did a lot of film analysis. And there was a lot more, I felt like it was a lot more in depth. Sometimes the online stuff is much more in depth than if you have a group of people and the instructor's kind of going around and just kind of checking you off. You're not quite, you can kind of pass it without, you can fake it a little bit more, but when all of a sudden you're like, oh no, I got to go through. Same thing with like your first aid and your CPR and stuff like that. I find like it's much more thorough online than it is when we would do the in-person.
That's how I got my USA weightlifting club coach. That was years ago, but I snuck through it.
So that was one of the things we did. I also, unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but my CSCS had lapsed because I didn't have enough continuing education units. And so I was able to go back in and get that and turn in, because I had done them, I just hadn't turned them in.
Sure.
And so I was able to get that all straightened out, and had Eric McMahon did a great job helping us out, helping me out with that and getting that redone. So that, like, I got re-energized with the NSCA, because I kind of gotten away from that. Same thing with the CSCCA, going through that process and all that. And so doing that. And then, Hammer Strength did a really nice online clinic over I think it was last summer or fall, or like last spring or something. And that again, it was a lot of the clinics that I would have attended when I was coaching in college, but just my schedule in the NFL precluded me from doing it. And now I could I could do this online, where, I can't watch it, but I can go back and watch the recording of it and all that kind of stuff. So I found I did a lot of that. And then you have your equipment companies are doing some things. Perch did a nice job. They're one of the velocity-based training camera systems. They had some speakers, and I would tie in and just turn on my computer and listen to it and do that. And then I've done a ton of reading. I mean, I read a lot anyways, but I felt like I've done more reading in the last year than I've done in a long time. So I feel like I've been able to use this, especially last fall, last spring and summer, when we were limited really on how much contact we could have with our players, like our off-season program got canceled and all that. I feel like, you got to be doing something all the time to make yourself better. And sometimes that comes from training athletes and paying attention to the athlete and what's going on, what's working. And if you don't have that laboratory open, you better open up another lab. So the video lab opened up this past off season and was able to do that. So I got a lot of work that way.
That's cool. That's it's just reinforcing what I've already thought, is that we've just got to continually learn, because it's still such a young science and there's more information going out there all the time. And if you think that even a good deal of it, you're not in the right frame of mind, because the more I learn, the more I realize, the less I know. So when it comes to being down on the field, I'm curious, as your role of strength and conditioning coach during game time, what's your role on the sidelines there? What are you doing?
So there's two things. One, NFL, besides being a sports organization, we're also an entertainment medium, right? So it's true. We're in the entertainment industry. Okay. And so one of my roles pregame is timing up and making sure, like when ESPN or Fox or CBS or whatever gets that shot of the team leaving the tunnel and it's perfect, and they see them just at a time. That didn't happen by accident. That's not just because the cameraman's just lucky to get that on thing.
That's you?
We have to hit our marks. And so we have to make sure we leave the locker room at the right time. And so we have a whole timing schedule of when everything's going to happen. And pregame, that's one of my responsibilities, to kind of make sure everybody's in the right place at the right time. Leaves the locker room at the right time. We know how long it's going to take them to walk from the locker room to enter the field. And so that's when they need to leave the locker room, 2-minute warning, do some things like that. So I'm calling that stuff out. And that's behind the scene stuff. Same thing at halftime. You'll see me clicking my stopwatch as soon as the clock starts for halftime, to make sure, because the halftime is 13 minutes long. And at the 9-minute mark, we have to make sure that the coaches' meetings are done, so that they can go back and do any corrections or changes or any kind of adjustments we're going to make at halftime. And then at the 7-minute mark, I go out to find the referees, and at the 5-minute mark is the 2-minute warning to get back to the field. And then at the 3-minute mark, they've got to be out of the locker room to make sure that they're on the field in time for kickoff second half. So that's part of it. But that's like, okay, so why does the strength coach do it? Because I'm the one that can do it, right? I'm not worried about, blocking an edge rusher or stopping a, whatever route or something. So I've got that. I'm also responsible. My staff and I are also responsible for helping the players warm up and get ready to go, and also stay warmed up and ready to go on the sidelines. Like a guy may come out and say, "Hey, I need an extra stretch." They've been in and out, or making sure a guy he's fighting a muscle pull a little bit, and so we're keeping him warmed up when he's not he's sitting on a bike, and we're working on some stuff with that, or we're making sure they're hydrated if it's a super hot game, or making sure they're getting enough, helping the dietitian because she's on the sidelines as well, making sure they're getting some carbohydrates into them, and that. During COVID, we had mask patrol, so we have to wear masks or get fined. So like part of our job was carry masks around and go, hey, mask up. So there's all kinds of different duties that you do that if you're just watching the game, you're like, what are they doing? And then the ultimate is the get back coach.
Get back coach.
Sure everybody's behind the line.
Oh, get back.
So get back. That's strength coaches usually the get back coach, but it's like. That's now, they used to be just like, you call them the get back. Now it's like the official title. The refs will come up, okay, who's your get back coach? Like, hey, all right, Dan, make sure you got a problem with, and a lot of that, the refs will communicate with us about, hey, number 72 is, on edge a little bit. You might want to calm him down, make sure he doesn't get this, or hey, sometimes it's like, could you help us with the head coach and keep him off the field, kind of thing. And, so
gotcha.
We have a variety of jobs.
It sounds it. You mentioned one of the biggest ones is warming up the players. And I'm curious, as the season progresses, do the warm-ups change, or are they a fairly standard thing that you just you go through? What's the warm-up like?
Our standard warm-up is pretty much the same all year long.
Okay.
There's a series of active movement work we do, and some kind of different yoga inspired static stretching, along with some movement patterns and some little just kind of flows that we do to warm up. But most of the players have a routine that they follow, both to physically get ready, warmed up, and then like skill specifically get ready to go. So some of my assistants maybe throwing the tight ends the ball, running them, just getting their hands warmed up, or we might have a D lineman hitting the pad of the goalpost, just getting used to kind of getting their hands. And guys have certain things, and it becomes very individualized and very strictly routine. There's also a process for injured players that we're making a decision on whether or not that player is going to be active for the game, or whether or not they're not going to be active for the game. And so we may work them out before we have to turn in those active players, take them through a little routine on the field, running, whatever their position is, kind of position specific. It'll be maybe the strength coach and the trainer and the position coach kind of going through some drills, individual drills, just to see if they can do it. A guy's had a hamstring issue. You feel pretty good about it, but he's a little, so you go out and run some stuff to find out, hey, is he still guarding that? Or can he open up? How's the player feel? So that's sometimes you have to do that. That's not an every game deal, but as the year goes along, you may find more of that because you have more guys that are, we're a 100% injury sport. So everybody's hurt at some point. So they're dealing with that injury. To think that guys are going on the field, when like fans will get frustrated because, well, this guy's not on the field. Well, everyone on the field is hurting with something. It's just, if you're good enough to go, you may not be great, but is your 80% worthwhile putting you out there, or will we be better off to have another guy who can be at their 90% or whatever? So.
Wow, that's the first time I have heard anybody say it's 100% injury sport. It was just something I never really considered, because being a fan, of course, you're just looking and you're thinking, oh yeah, they got some bumps and bruises from last week, but they're ready to go. But honestly, that's not the case.
They're dealing with something, and they're dealing with accumulation. I mean, you're dealing with guys in their 30s and 40s, and a regular person knows that as you get older, it takes a little longer to get back. I don't recover from my lifting workouts anywhere near as fast as I used to before.
Yeah.
I get sore for 2 or 3 days after a heavy squat workout or whatever. So, but I'm 55.
Then looking into this upcoming year, and let's say vaccines get rolled out and crowds start to get back in the stadium and so on. What are you looking forward to for this coming season?
Well, one, I'm looking forward to, hopefully we'll have an off-season program, because that'll make things a lot easier for us, from my standpoint. And that's still up in the air.
Did you notice, by not having a preseason, or because you didn't really, it was a very condensed.
We didn't play any preseason games.
Did you notice a higher injury rate because you did not have that?
There's higher injury rates at specific, for specific plays. Like, I believe the punt coverage unit had more soft tissue injuries, had a spike in the soft tissue injuries and ACLs.
Wow.
Compared to last year. And that makes a lot of sense, because that's a unit that you don't really practice full speed during the year, because you're running 40, 50 yards down the field at full speed and changing direction. So it's not like something that you feel real comfortable doing during the week, right?
No.
Like the defensive back coach does not want you to have his corner runs full speed down the field, for that long. So the special teams coach is in a bind, so they don't get to practice that. And so if these guys haven't practiced, the only time you practice that is in OTAs, or off-season program, and during training camp. And so they never get to practice that. So it makes sense that if you don't practice something, if you don't prepare your body to do something, you're going to possibly have more of an injury. So it balanced out. I think the injury rate during camp balanced out just because you weren't playing any games. And so the games are more of an opportunity to get hurt. So if you're not playing them, you're not seeing those injuries. But then again, you would say maybe you saw more soft tissue. So I haven't got the full injury data yet in, but I've heard, for instance, just talking to the special teams coaches, that was one area that spiked. The biggest thing I think becomes a difficult thing is for the younger players and the college free agent type players and the rookies coming in without having that hands-on experience of being coached. They can get coached, but they can't really demonstrate their performance. And so, I would imagine last year there were a number of kind of young unknown players that didn't make rosters because they had no opportunity to prove themselves. And so the coaching staff felt more comfortable with an older proven player who in another year might have gotten beat out by a young guy. So I think it really hurt those young players. And so I'm hoping for their standpoint, because I was a college free agent coming out of, my brief cup of coffee I had as a player in the NFL, I was a free agent. I wasn't drafted. So I didn't make it then. So I would have had no chance of making it in this setting. But anyway, so I'm always worried about those guys a little bit, because that's my people. So.
Coach, this has been epic for me. This has been a great hour. I really appreciate your time. I know you got a whole bunch of stuff and people are knocking on your door trying to get in and all that. So
gotta go catch up to the head coach and meet the coach he was going to introduce me to. So
yeah. Well, I'll let you get back to them. I appreciate you taking the time, and good luck with next season.
Sure.
And I just wish you well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And that brings another episode of the Zelos podcast to a close. Thank you, Coach Dalrymple. I really appreciate it, Dan. And wish you nothing but the best with New Orleans Saints in next season. And thank you, everyone, for listening in to yet another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe and tell others. We want to see you back here next week.